Because his laser has very little end lag, and his jab comes out extremely quick. I believe it's like frame 2 or 3. So you can kind of check people down, force them back on the ground, then force like 50-50s after that.
If you're even somewhat acquainted with the competitive Smash Brothers scene, you may have heard the claim that Brawl was the worst of the Smash games competitively, with reasons given being random tripping, campy gameplay, floaty physics, poor character balance, and the ability to cancel hitstun almost immediately after taking any hit. While these reasons are not unfounded, and many of these are legitimate issues, quite a lot of nuance is left out of the discussion. Excluding Smash 64 perhaps, Super Smash Bros. Brawl is the most poorly understood title in the series. What I find unfair is that such discussions tend to be so one-sidedly negative that it leaves you thinking Brawl is that one Smash game with few if any redeeming qualities. I will deal with the low-hanging fruit first, random tripping. Any character has a 1% chance of tripping during the start of their dash animation. The most commonly cited issue people have with Brawl, and it is indeed a stupid mechanic that even a casual player would find annoying, but contrary to what some Reddit commenters would have you think, it rarely had an impact on gameplay. There is a further misconception related to random tripping, that it disincentivized dashing and running, giving way to a very campy meta where people would walk and jump in favor of moving quickly across the ground. All because of something that rarely happened and you could go entire matches without seeing. The truth is, in Brawl, people preferred walking because running limited your options too much. When your character is running, your actions are restricted to jump, dash attack, dash grab, up smash, and special attacks, along with shielding. Attempting to turn around in the middle of a run leads to a laggy turnaround animation, and your character has to skid before coming to a complete stop. Your character loses access to their faster, safer tilt attacks and jab. As such, people tended to run only when they were chasing someone in their disadvantaged state, trying to intercept a landing. Now that we've dealt with random tripping, it's time to move to the more complicated subjects. The game's combo system, character balancing, and neutral gameplay. Brawl introduced the much maligned hitstun cancelling mechanic that has gone on to be featured in its sequels, if in a much weaker form. There are two animations that a character can be sent into when being hit. The first is the low knockback animation, for moves that deal fewer than 80 units of knockback. For the character being hit, this is the worst kind of hitstun animation as there is no way to cancel hitstun and is commonly taken advantage of for low % guaranteed combos and chain throws, such as Sheik's forward tilt and Falco's down throw. On the whole, there is very little that your character can do in this animation other than take the next blow. The next animation is the tumble animation that occurs upon taking more than 80 units of knockback. This is where the mechanic of hitstun cancelling comes into play. After only 13 frames of tumble hitstun, a character can air dodge, and after 26 frames they can attack, or jump. This is regardless of how much knockback has been taken. The window remains stable at 13 and 26 frames. Well, I lied, there's more than two animations. There is a third animation known as reeling, which while visibly different to tumble, is functionally the same regarding hitstun. And if you're curious, for some time during the sequel Smash 4's life, it was thought that hitstun cancelling was removed. In reality, it still does exist, except the window for dodging and attacking was shifted to 40 and 46 frames respectively, with the window shifting later at higher knockback values. The system is still present in this form in Ultimate. Anyway, the ramifications of Brawl's hitstun cancelling are obvious. Guaranteed combos are effectively removed beyond low percentages. Characters like Captain Falcon and Ganondorf, who previously relied on chaining high knockback moves together, are most adversely affected. But to say that Brawl lacks a combo system, or perhaps more accurately a follow-up system or punish game, is inaccurate. There is much more nuance here. For one, air dodging is risky. Characters suffer noticeable ending lag on their air dodges that can be punished, especially by characters with far-reaching hitboxes that last for a long time. and a lot of the viable characters have those. The alternative is to wait to attack on frame 26, but not every character has access to fast aerial options to break out of the situation, especially a fast-hitting aerial that hits below them where the opponent will normally be. Even characters with fast aerials are at risk of getting their move blocked, assuming the interaction is taking place near to the ground, after which they can get punished by a grab or other out-of-shield option, basically resetting the situation and allowing you to go for another follow-up. Remember, shields are strong in this game, and we will get back to them in the neutral section. The advantaged player doesn't even have to block. They can use their own attacks to beat out the disadvantaged player's aerial. And most of the viable characters do have aerials or tilts that are well suited to beating out other hitboxes. Examples are Falco's back aerial, Snake's up tilt, Marth's forward aerial. The last option for the defender is to jump, which is the most likely to avoid the next attack. But now you have merely reset the situation, only this time you are without a jump and liable to getting killed if your character has a bad recovery and gets knocked off stage. Even when moves send a character too far to immediately punish their defensive options, there is still a chance to punish their landing options. Dash attacks are generally useful here, as they start quickly, have good hitboxes, and cover a lot of distance. While aerial attacks are also useful, because unless you are playing Snake, top tier characters have low landing lag on their aerials with generous auto-cancel windows. Which is something that can't be said about the sequel Smash 4, where landing lag was increased across the board and auto-cancel frames were made useless, excluding a few specific instances. A primer for those of you who may not be familiar with the game or need to refresh their memory. Every aerial attack features a window after the hitbox ends, during the move's recovery frames or ending lag, where the move will incur no landing lag other than the normal landing lag if the character hits the ground. Diddy Kong's forward air, for example, a staple move in his playstyle. This attack would normally incur a hefty 30 frame landing lag penalty, which is more than enough time for him to be punished with a plethora of moves. However, starting on frame 26, the move's auto-cancel window begins and it won't incur any landing lag. His normal landing animation will play, allowing him to act much faster. Every aerial has its own specific timings, and one of the first steps to mastering your chosen character is to learn to utilize their auto-cancels, though the mechanic is actually a bit more intuitive than that, as generally speaking, the auto-cancel windows make visual sense, as the character has very clearly finished their attack animation. It would be weird if Diddy landed on, say, frame 30 or 33 of his forward air, after he has clearly retracted his legs and gone into his normal falling animation, and he still incurred the full 30 frames of landing lag. Auto-cancelling is one reason Brawl's slower falling speeds actually help counterintuitively to speed up the gameplay, at least compared to its sequel Smash 4. Characters have more control of their aerial drift, and therefore a capacity to mix up the timings of their aerial attacks. While auto-cancelling is indeed present in every Smash game, the technique is most prominent in Brawl. It's a pretty important aspect of the metagame and one that we will revisit a few times in the video. For now though, suffice to say, Brawl's characters on the whole have much better frame data than they did have in Smash 4. Brawl gave you more options to intercept landings than Smash 4, where you were mostly limited to either dash attack or blocking. Running into a short hop back aerial was a really good option in Brawl. It would stuff out the defender's move if they chose to attack, and if they chose to land and block, the auto-cancel frames and low landing lag meant you could throw out another fast hitbox to stuff out their grab. Now, in Brawl, of course, the shielding player could just keep blocking or roll to get out of pressure, but I don't count that as a flaw in the design. That's just the nature of the guessing game. Good coverage options simply improve your ability to follow up. They don't make things guaranteed, unless you are Meta Knight, but anyway. For the longest time, I used to think that Smash 4's follow-up system was better, purely because the later hitstun cancel led to more guaranteed combos, at a higher percentage than were possible in Brawl. But Smash 4 also significantly reduced the ending lag on air dodges, tightening the window you had to punish them, which when combined with the higher landing lag on aerial attacks meant that it was often far too easy for the defender to escape a bad situation. To be clear here, I do not think hitstun cancelling is a good mechanic at all, neither in Brawl nor in Smash 4 or Ultimate. It's just that Brawl has other things that allow you to compensate for the loss of guaranteed combos. Fast, far-reaching aerial attacks that don't have absurd landing lag or useless auto-cancel frames that make them a commitment, and air dodges that are more punishable. Sheik was such a dominant character for much of Smash 4's lifespan, in large part because she was one of the few characters who had a really good auto-cancel on her forward aerial attack, along with just 10 frames of landing lag and good range. On the topic of things that Smash 4 made worse from Brawl, directional influence, the mechanic that allows you to alter your trajectory upon getting hit. In Melee, the game that introduced the mechanic, you could alter your character's launch angle by up to 20 degrees, allowing you to escape combos or survive powerful moves that would have otherwise killed. It made combos in Melee into a guessing game, and made the combo system more dynamic in that game. Brawl retained the system, with one major difference. You can't DI moves that don't put you into the tumble animation, which is another reason why it sucks to get stuck in this animation. Against moves that send into tumble, the mechanic behaves the same, allowing up to a 20-degree deviation from the move's launch angle. Because of hitstun cancelling, the mechanic isn't really useful for escaping combos, but it still is important for survival. Smash 4 nerfed DI substantially, to the point that you can only alter your character's launch angle by a hair under 10 degrees. About half of what was possible in Melee and Brawl. And yeah, this Smash 4 system gets used in Ultimate because Smash 4 was basically a 4-year beta test for that game. Put these things together, the nerfed DI system, laggier aerial attacks, and safer air dodges, and Smash 4 was a game where characters would fish for the same repetitive cookie-cutter combos. Down throw, up air, return to neutral, try again. Or if you were Mario, add in a few up tilts. You only needed to watch a character for one match to see basically everything they had to offer. Characters like Sheik stood out because of how long her combos were, but that was partly because her damage output was reduced so heavily that it was kinda necessary to compensate. That was a common theme in Smash 4. Despite the reduced safety on many attacks, their damage output was also nerfed, leaving that game to be as slow-paced as Brawl even while Smash 4 rule sets used only 2 stocks instead of Brawl's 3. Smash 4 is an annoying game to talk about because while Brawl made changes to the engine that are easy to identify, Smash 4 took 2 steps in the right direction, nerfing hitstun cancelling and removing ledge invincibility on regrab, which prevented people from stalling on the ledge. But Smash 4 took several subtle steps backward through its changes to most characters' movesets. I've already spoken about the increased lag on aerials, but there is more. The increased knockback on many throws, especially throws that were used to set up low percent combos. The most prominent examples are the down throws of Falco, King DDD, Meta Knight, and Pikachu. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. 3 of those characters had really good chain throws using those exact moves in Brawl. It made sense to increase the knockback for balance purposes, you might say. This is a case of misidentifying the problem. Brawl was full of chain throws and other combos involving spamming the same move, not because of their low knockback. Melee was full of low knockback moves, but combos were very dynamic and varied in that game. Brawl was full of such things because of a mechanic known as stale move negation. A mechanic that has been in every Smash game, which reduces the damage and knockback of a move that is frequently used. The last 9 moves performed by a character in Brawl are put into the staleness queue. The idea was to punish players for spamming kill moves, but in competitive play it leads to many repetitive combos, like Sheik's forward tilt combo on Fox. Because the move is being loaded into the staleness queue, The reduced knockback is allowing it to combo far longer than it would otherwise, because Brawl has a staling effect that is far worse than Melee, and Smash 4 for that matter. This is one of the few changes I would make to Brawl, before I would even remove hitstun cancelling. One of the few major improvements Smash 4 made over Brawl was to tone down the effects of the staling, but as if to distance itself from Brawl as much as possible, they seem to have added so much ending lag and knockback to throws, like to make sure you can't chain grab. Except they already implemented a specific countermeasure against chain grabbing. Characters are immune to being grabbed for 70 frames after being launched using a throw, and the same applies to Ultimate. So all the nerfs to throws serve only to reduce your ability to punish off of them and the variety of viable follow-up options. I mentioned a few characters already, but Marth is possibly the worst example of this. In Brawl, his forward throw gave him follow-up potential into his aerials, and chain throws on fast fallers at very low percentages. I should make it clear, I don't consider chain throws to be an inherently bad thing, and I don't think they should be treated any differently to the rest of the game's combo system. Sure, some of them might look lame, but the nature of competitive gameplay is that you have to put up with lameness if you are playing to win. Something being termed lame is poor reasoning on its own to nerf it or remove it. Now, I do agree that infinites are generally really bad, more specifically ones that are easy to perform, such as DDD's down throw, infinite on Donkey Kong. This is an extreme case of an option being so powerful as to basically make the game uninteractive. Level 9 CPUs are useful for demonstrating a point here, for their tendency to air dodge your attack at the first possible frame after being hit. Fox is notably one of the few viable characters in this game that lacks any sort of overpowered move or combo. His moveset is simply well balanced and above average on the whole. He has neither Falco's down throw, chain throw, nor Marth's grab release jank, and yet he gets rewarded pretty strongly for every successful hit. Even though most of these follow-ups can be dodged and so aren't quite true combos, his frame data, and it's important to emphasize, Brawl's characters all have almost unanimously superior frame data on all their moves, especially aerial attacks, when compared to their Smash 4 incarnations. Fox's frame data gives him the time to punish his opponent's defensive options. CPUs, I know, have some pretty notorious bad habits that are easy to pick up on, but when it comes to comboing them, they are largely restricted to the same defensive options as a human player would be. And human players will have habits that you will be picking up on anyway. The worse aerial frame data in Smash 4 means that your ability to keep the opponent trapped and disadvantaged is greatly reduced, which funnels players into relying on those cookie cutter throw combos. But it goes beyond just extending combos. Brawl's aerial attacks are also quite effective at starting combos themselves, which in turn gives you more options on the approach. Pay attention to Smash 4 VODs and you will notice that characters who are not Sheik are spending most of their time just running back and forth, maybe dashing in every now and then hoping to get a grab. Having access to both strong grounded and aerial approach options that are not only safe to throw out but also offer reliable conversions into a stronger advantage, gives you more room to mix up your approach. And that in turn helps to speed up the pace of the game. My point is that when it comes to the combo system, Smash 4 correctly identified the problems in Brawl, but proceeded to provide remedies that left the game less interactive, less interesting, and made it far too difficult for players to capitalize on a neutral win and keep the opponent in disadvantage. And the few characters that could convert meaningfully off a successful hit ended up being nerfed in updates, which you may think is sensible, except the fact those nerfs are supposedly needed in the first place hints at an underlying issue with the game's balancing of offensive and defensive options. Brawl Meta Knight. He is plastered over this game's reputation, and for some very, very good reasons. It was common to find half or more of a single top 8 comprised of Meta Knight mains. Your character's viability basically came down to 1. Are they Meta Knight? And 2. If they're not Meta Knight, can they deal with Meta Knight somewhat competently? Some characters who would have been otherwise tournament viable ended up hamstrung by having a bad matchup versus Meta Knight. Rob and Donkey Kong to name a few. For those who are asking why, Meta Knight had all the usual characteristics of a top tier fighting game character. Fast frame data and a good set of kill moves. These things in and of themselves wouldn't normally make a character excessively dominating. Melee Fox has a frame 1 combo starter and kill moves that he can combo into reliably, after all, and he isn't nearly as domineering in his game. What elevated Meta Knight from your run-of-the-mill best character to one that gave the game an existential crisis was how he interacted with the game's universal mechanics, hitstun cancelling and the ledge mechanics, combined with his low skill floor. Let me illustrate my point by continuing with the comparison to Melee Fox. Despite Fox's positive attributes, he is ultimately held back by 2 things. He's very difficult to play and play well consistently, so technically demanding that people have given themselves hand injuries trying to play him. And secondly, he suffers for making those mistakes. Melee doesn't have any hitstun cancelling whatsoever. If an attack deals 60 frames of hitstun, you have to sit through those 60 frames of hitstun before you can act. The only exception being if your character hits the ground before then, which will allow them to tech. As such, virtually any character who lands a hit on Fox can convert that into a strong advantage. You guessed it, Meta Knight can cancel hitstun. And to make matters worse, he has some of the best aerial attacks in the game, 5 mid-air jumps, the best air dodge, and by holding the jump button he can glide, which allows him to glide away to safety and also perform a glide attack. And his up special deals high knockback while transitioning into yet another glide. Outside of a few specific chain throws and grab release setups, most characters can't punish his defensive options without putting themselves at great risk. It then follows that he is not a difficult character to pick up and do well with. The disjointed hitboxes on his moves make punishing his attacks out of shield very difficult, and his overall attack speed, he can perform his up air attack 4 times in 1 second. Means that when he pops you up into the air, he can easily cover all your defensive options, even if his initial guess is wrong. Meta Knight was bad for Brawl not because he was lame, but because he could ignore entire systems that other characters had to put up with. And that is no more apparent in how he takes advantage of the ledge mechanics. He obviously has an extremely easy time getting back to the stage, but where things truly get ugly is when he grabs onto the ledge and uses the invincibility to stall. Good luck challenging him, because unless you are Snake who can arc his hand grenades down there, you are not beating his up air attack. They even had to go as far as to implement a ledge grab limit rule in tournaments, because there was no other way he was getting up from there. But, like, what about the rest of the cast? They are better balanced than popular opinion might have you think. There are some infamously one-sided matchups, like DDD versus Donkey Kong, or Marth versus Lucas or Ness, or Wolf versus, well, a few characters. But in a game with 39 characters, those matchups are relatively few and far between. In many cases, you would just invest in a secondary character like in any other fighting game, so it was no big deal. Meta Knight is unique among the top tiers in being easy to play. Snake is anything but a simple character, using a combination of grenades, remote guided missiles, mortar shells, C4 and landmines to control the stage. He's a fascinating character to watch when played well. He's also not lacking in close range prowess. His jab and tilts are among the best in the game, having huge hitboxes that can kill at very realistic percentages, his up tilt being the most infamous, stronger than even some characters' smash attacks. Falco's playstyle is all about locking the stage down with his lasers. His blaster has a lot of ending lag when used on the ground, but the aerial version auto-cancels on landing, greatly increasing the rate at which he can put more out. He has the ability to slightly change up the timings on his blaster shots to mess up your shield and dodge timing. He can even silent laser, firing a laser shot so close to the ground that the move auto-cancels before the sound effect even plays, making it that much harder to deal with. Closing the distance against him seems logical, only you now have to contest his strong boxing game courtesy of his jab, which hits on frame 2 and has deceptive range, and can be cancelled into his grab, for his down throw chain throw that can deliver 40% or more damage. His down aerial hits on frame 5, has a lingering hitbox, and auto cancels in a short hop. His back aerial shares these positive traits. What sets a character like Falco apart from Meta Knight, despite having the potential to be very lame, is that Falco is going to have a bad time if you break his stage control. His higher falling speed and slow airspeed leaves him vulnerable to chain throws and combos that a good chunk of the cast doesn't have to contend with. And beyond that, his poor horizontal speed gives him a tough time escaping follow-ups. Diddy Kong has a different take on the projectile game. Using his 2 bananas, he can set up moves at any percentage and even do something known as glide tossing, which is cancelling a roll with an item toss so that he carries the momentum from the roll and zooms across the stage. Olimar is another very technical character. He can have up to 6 Pikmin following him at once, with each type having its own unique properties. White Pikmin are great at racking up damage, yellow Pikmin travel the farthest when thrown, blue Pikmin give him access to a powerful kill throw, and purple Pikmin deal a hefty blow at the cost of traveling the shortest distance and being unable to latch onto targets. The Pikmin he plucks are randomized, though the chances are affected by the kind of terrain he plucks them from. Brawl's characters may have been mostly very campy and not flashy in the way of combos or kill setups that would be food for highlight reels, but they did have quite a bit of depth to them, and there was a lot you could do to distinguish yourself from other people using the same character. That's the most damning part of its sequel. Smash 4 not only removed much of the depth of interaction from the combo game, but actively went further to streamline characters' neutral games, all in the name of balance. It took the fear of another Brawl Meta Knight and used it to rip anything of interest out of the game. You need only look at how Falco and Olimar suffered in the transition. Olimar had his Pikmin count reduced to 3, so that his playstyle now mostly revolved around repetitive down throw into aerial attack combos that the game was rife with. Falco, man, they did you dirty. His down throw can't combo into anything besides dash attack. His down aerial has 11 more frames of startup, higher landing lag, and can no longer auto cancel in a short hop. The removal of dash attack cancelled up smash, a technique from Brawl that added another approach option, restricts his approach even further. And finally, most of all, his blaster no longer auto-cancels on landing. Diddy Kong wasn't spared either. Glide tossing is nerfed so as to be useless, and he can now have only 1 banana out at a time instead of 2. His playstyle is centered around, well, you guessed, generic repetitive grab combos. He's still a top tier character, but that doesn't convey the whole story of how much was removed in the transition. The thing is, Smash 4 players, at the time of course, because people have slowly come around to the fact that it wasn't much of an improvement over Brawl, would defend these changes with the tried and true balance argument. And while Smash 4 is definitely more balanced than Brawl, that balance was largely achieved at the cost of a cast full of one-dimensional characters. And I should know that, because I mained Meta Knight, yes, in Smash 4, not Brawl, and in Smash 4 his game plan revolved around fishing for dash attack and down throw, like so many other characters. Every time the devs wanted to improve a character, their go-to solution was just to give them a combo throw. Donkey Kong got his up throw up air that would lead into a kill, Bowser got up throw up air. Both of these characters saw some of the biggest rises in viability across Smash 4's lifespan, in large part thanks to their combo throws. And, by the way, Bowser's up throw ended up being so damn central to his gameplay that they nerfed it a few patches later. Likewise, nerfs also tended to come down to combo throws. Sheik had her down and forward throws nerfed to deal more knockback, preventing her from setting up kills with them. Diddy Kong and Luigi had their combo throws nerfed in the same manner. But why? If chain throws were removed, then why the obsession with nerfing throw-based combos? Why, especially with how they toned down hitstun cancelling? Supposedly to allow the very combos that they were now patching out? I still can't figure out a definitive answer to this. Rather than stop to ask if something was fundamentally wrong with the game, the fact that throws were so powerful and so heavily used because all the other options, namely aerials and projectiles, were nerfed, they simply kept ripping stuff out. The result is characters who are one-dimensional, even top tiers such as Sheik. Sheik is one of the most interesting characters that Smash 4 had to offer, and she still falls short of Brawl's top tiers in terms of flexibility of playstyle. But hey, where even is Bayonetta in this discussion? Was she a broken character, and did she deserve all the nerfs she received, with an entire patch being dedicated to nerfing her? Firstly, Bayonetta isn't anywhere near as grossly centralizing as Meta Knight was in Brawl. Anyone who even suggests that is completely misinformed on the history of Brawl. She did not possess frame data that was in another league of its own, nor the exaggerated hitboxes that allowed Meta Knight to poke at you from multiple character lengths away. Nor, thanks to the changes to legend mechanics in Smash 4, did she have any viable method of stalling the game. What Bayonetta did do was point to all the problems inherent to Smash 4's design, and yet to this day no one has picked up on these actual problems, instead mistaking the symptom for the core issue, the nerfed DI system. Had Smash 4 simply reused the DI system as it had existed in the previous two games, it would have been trivially easy to escape her combos, or at the very least make it substantially harder for her to get consistent, guaranteed follow-ups. The other issue is the neutral game, as we will go into more detail shortly. But as it pertains to Bayonetta, her very rewarding combos did not mesh well, as far as balance is concerned, with the restricted approach options in Smash 4. It was bad enough that characters had limited options to throw out in neutral. It was even worse to know that the risk-reward ratio was so lopsided against you. And on top of that, Smash 4 heavily nerfed the Smash DI system from Brawl. In case you don't remember what that was, during hit lag, moving the control stick in a certain direction would shift a character's hurtbox in that direction. And it's also one of the reasons why multi-hit moves were generally quite bad in Brawl and even in Melee, which Bayonetta does have quite a few multi-hit moves in her kit, and those multi-hit moves are frequently used as combo starters and combo extenders. So it only reinforces my point of view that the nerf to DI and SDI had only negative consequences on the gameplay in Smash 4. Brawl's neutral game is known for, perhaps more than anything, the strength of its shields. Even the most powerful moves deal virtually no shield stun. Smash 4 inherited this on launch, but roughly a year or so later they patched shield stun to be much higher. Much higher. There is, however, a misconception that nerfing defensive options will lead players to be more aggressive. Brawl at the end of the day had the same pacing as Smash 4, and was arguably even faster paced given it had to work with 3 stocks instead of only 2. And I have some numbers to back that up. I randomly pulled whatever VODs came up when searching for competitive matches in the two games, and the results are telling. The average time it took for a stock to be lost in Brawl comes in at 86.5 seconds, across 62 stocks, while Smash 4, using a sample of 55 stocks, clocks in at around 78 seconds. In other words, barely a 10% difference between them, which is not something you would know for sure if you didn't actively take the time to collect the data. That's about one extra sentence of commentary to put into perspective. Brawl's rule set had an extra stock, which obviously meant the actual matches took longer to resolve. But the pace of interactions is hardly substantially slower than Smash 4. And in any case, as I have already stated before and will state once again later in this video, Brawl's interactions were qualitatively better even if that meant stocks lasted slightly longer. There's also the point of a stronger DI system. Being able to survive in Brawl was a stronger measure of skill and awareness than it could ever be in Smash 4, with that game's predictable and dominating kill confirms and gutted DI system. To put it another way, Brawl's gameplay looks like a more elaborate freeform dance, whereas Smash 4's is a scripted and highly choreographed fight scene. While defensive options were stronger in Brawl, offensive options were available to counterbalance them. I am of course referring to auto-cancelling aerial attacks. Look at Marth's neutral aerial frame data in Brawl and compare that to the next game. In Smash 4, the move auto-cancels more than 20 frames later. It can't auto-cancel in a short hop at all. The Brawl version of this move auto-cancels just 4 frames after the hitbox ends. And this is quite common among the cast. Peach's forward air auto-cancels the exact frame that the hitbox ends. The same applies to Didi's back air. And both of those are kill moves as well. Diddy Kong's forward air auto-cancels at frame 26. His back air at frame 20. Wolf's back air auto-cancels on frame 19. And without that, he goes through only 9 frames of landing lag anyway. Falco's down air, as mentioned earlier, auto-cancels in the short hop, just 5 frames after the hitbox ends. Even Ganondorf, the king of evil, master of thieves, arguably the worst character in Brawl, and the next 2 games, has a technique known as thunder stomping, auto-cancelling his down air in a short hop, comboing into itself and allowing him to get out another move in case you try to retaliate. With the exception of Diddy's forward air and Wolf, who doesn't return in Smash 4, these options had their auto-cancel frames significantly delayed. The fact that Diddy remained a top-tier character despite his nerfs goes to show how much a character can benefit from having just one safe button that covers the area in front of them. The most important area to cover in any matchup. And yeah, that move doesn't go to waste with Diddy players. Look, a game doesn't have to copy another in order to be good, but if you're going to make changes that take away from the gameplay, then you at least should add something that differentiates it and makes it worth playing. But yeah, this is why Brawl's shield game isn't that problematic, because many characters have safe grounded and aerial pokes, and the floaty physics are a benefit in allowing characters more control over their aerial spacing. The fact is that in order for a fighting game to be engaging, you need to have a well-balanced rock-paper-scissors dynamic between attack, block, and grab. Shield stun is low, but characters have low traction that generates a lot of shield pushback, meaning that even if the defending character technically has a frame advantage, they might not be able to cover the distance in time to effectively punish. Grabs get stuffed out by aerial attacks that aren't blocked, but grabs at best lead to highly damaging follow-ups, and in the worst cases, you get to leave your opponent in a bad spot where their landing or recovery can be intercepted. But what happens when you nerf shields, nerf throws, and then nerf attacks even harder? You don't get a game that encourages creativity or aggressive gameplay. You get people running around in a game of red light, green light, waiting to see who uses their laggy attacks first so the other person can dash attack or dash grab in there. Or, as an ultimate, where they buffed aerial attacks to having very low landing lag, but also nerfed grabs again, and largely reused the shield mechanics from Smash 4. People spamming short hop aerials hoping to be the first one to get the hit. This is what happens when you think that the way to create a meta of aggressive gameplay is to buff the aggressive options while nerfing the defensive ones. Smash 4 isn't the first one to make this mistake, because 64 was with how high hitstun was in that game and how terrible shields were. But Smash 4 was a regression from Brawl, which, while itself a regression from Melee, was still generally well balanced on both sides. It's a shame that Meta Knight's dominance of the meta, as merited as the criticism is, causes people to write the game off, because Brawl's neutral and combo games, especially among its non-Meta Knight top tiers, was quite deep. One thing Melee and Brawl hold in common is a plethora of moves that possess a certain combination of speed, power, and range, sometimes all at once, some of which can be meta-defining. Melee Fox's Frame 1 Reflector is possibly the most notorious example, being an excellent shield pressure option and the opener to many of his combos and tech chases, in addition to being a deadly offstage finisher thanks to its horizontal knockback. Brawl has stuff like Snake's up tilt, or all of his tilts, his up smash that is one of the few smash attacks to generate a projectile, a mortar shell that flies higher the more you charge the move. There's Falco's down air, a frame 5 move that meteor smashes opponents, and a safe neutral poke option. DDD's back air can beat out almost anything, and is only held back by his slow airspeed and the fact that he uses it so much it takes up a few slots in the staleness queue. If Brawl had received post-release support, I expect they would have gone out of their way to nerf these options and then some. That is, after all, exactly what they spent 2 years doing following Smash 4's release. Here's the thing, Brawl was fine with these hitboxes. Because of how little shield stun there was, it made sense that characters would have moves with larger hitboxes, that, if spaced well, could keep them safe from retaliation. And with how much damage characters like Marth, Falco, DDD, and most of all Ice Climbers could get off a grab, it paid to have hitboxes that let you threaten the opponent while keeping some distance.
There's also the fact that Brawl had a much stronger projectile game, thanks to, among other things, the fact that characters could auto-cancel their projectiles if used in a short hop, which gave yet another option to threaten and pressure opponents without opening oneself up to shield-related retaliation.
Meta Knight isn't unique in that he has crazy moves, he just has an unusual concentration of them. Smash 4 is in one respect a better balanced game in this regard. The only move that even comes close to the crap you see in Brawl is Sheik's forward air, and unsurprisingly, that was nerfed more than once across the game's lifespan. But even then, it's unmatched in its combination of speed, range, and an auto-cancel on frame 11, in a game where characters usually have to wait more than 30 frames to auto-cancel an aerial. It was the cornerstone of her metagame. Every match involving a Sheik had her string this move together and combo into it off her grab and tilts. There's something to be said that pursuing perfect character balance is a fool's errand, that perhaps the only result that can be attained is a game with extremely bland and one-dimensional characters. Brawl's hitboxes led to some balance issues, the same way that you could argue that Melee's Fox Reflector and Falco down air are moves that are just too good. But personally, I find that stuff is fun to play against and gives the game a sense of character. Especially when the characters are deep enough to allow you to mix and match their different options. When I play Brawl Falco, I prefer getting up close and personal, using his jab, down air, and back air to box with opponents. But someone else might prefer to shut down the other player with lasers, frustrating them into using an unsafe option that leaves them taking more than 40% from a chain throw. Brawl may have had only 39 characters compared to the more than 80 in Ultimate, but of those 39 characters, a good portion of them had options that you could explore. Melee has just 26, of whom anywhere from 7 to 12 can be tournament viable, depending on who you ask. And even within the top tier, people are still pushing their characters to the limit to this day. Part of the negative perception surrounding Brawl comes from the reality that it is more fun to play than it is to watch. A game like Melee and to a lesser extent Ultimate are faster paced and more visually exciting, especially with the insane movement options and freeform combos of the former. Even Smash 4 is arguably a better spectator sport than Brawl, but I didn't make this video to evaluate their merits in that regard, but to examine the gameplay on its own merit and show that Brawl, for all its flaws, still had a lot going for it.
I know that Brawl's perception has undergone a bit of a shift in the last year or so, as people seem to be taking more interest in learning about it online and showcasing some of its more overlooked aspects. But I think it's interesting to ask why only now, and why did Brawl even gain a negative perception to begin with? Firstly, the competitive community's initial reception to the game was actually overall quite positive, despite how unfairly the Melee documentary depicted this, which in turn got parroted all over forums by people who had just joined the scene in 2013. There was quite a bit of history being rewritten, a shame considering the rest of that series was solid. It's really important to remember that Brawl had a competitive scene that was larger than Melee's for quite a few years following its release. There's also the factor of bad timing. While Brawl had the advantage of releasing on a highly successful console, a huge advantage over Smash 4, Brawl released several years too early to ride the wave of streaming spearheaded by Twitch. Smash 4 reaped the benefits of that trend. Especially after all the work I've put into this video, I can't overstate just how difficult it is to source footage from the early Brawl days. It's difficult to find VODs with passable video quality, let alone ones with commentary. Also, where the hell are the Ice Climbers? Did I just make a Brawl retrospective not even mentioning them? It's a thorny issue that has led to the perception of Brawl being ruined by the unholy duo of Meta Knight and the Climbers. But that's actually quite unfair to the Ice Climbers. I'm sure you've seen the clips of them utterly annihilating the cast with their zero death chain throws. That's really about the only thing they had going for them. They had awful mobility across the board, terrible aerial attacks, terrible traction that made it hard for them to punish out of the shield with a grab. And if the partner dies, then the kill combo becomes a non-factor. Not to mention they had an awful recovery. In a game where all the top and high tiers had great projectiles barring Meta Knight, and where fast aerial attacks dominated the meta, they stood no chance. If it weren't for that very same Meta Knight himself. In the early Brawl days, most rule sets had a longer list of legal stages, such as Rainbow Cruise. Remember what I said about the Ice Climbers having awful mobility and pretty bad aerial attacks? They sucked on stages that emphasized movement and jumping, like Rainbow Cruise and Brinstar. But those same stages were the ones that accentuated Meta Knight's strengths even further. The most straightforward countermeasure was to simply ban him outright, which did eventually occur midway into the game's lifespan. But due to pressure from Meta Knight players and from non-Meta Knight players who had become specialists in the matchup, that rule set didn't last. Tournament organizers unbanned Meta Knight and instead took to banning the stages that overly favored him. Of course, there was no universal consensus on this, but in the game's later years, there was a growing trend to limit the number of legal stages, with the main reason given being Meta Knight's dominance on the counter picks. And that was something that indirectly benefited the Ice Climbers. Meta Knight's best stages happened to be their worst stages. Had Meta Knight been less excessive as a character, then there's a very real chance that the Ice Climbers would in turn have been significantly worse off. And we can look to Melee for an idea of how that would turn out. Even before wobbling was banned in Melee, the Ice Climbers were a relatively niche high-tier character. The exploit that allowed them to zero death the opponent wasn't nearly powerful enough to upset the meta and catapult them to the top of the list. So how have the long-held perceptions of Brawl held up? With everything I've showed in this video, the problems posed by random tripping and hitstun cancelling have been hugely exaggerated. What remains true, however, is that Meta Knight almost single-handedly ruins an otherwise good game. But whereas Bayonetta in Smash 4 was designed to be a combo-oriented character in a game that otherwise worked really hard to limit combos, Meta Knight won Brawl because he had more Brawl in him than the other Brawl characters. I think the most interesting discussion that Brawl can spark is just how much balance is needed and at what point it becomes self-defeating. Because as it stands, I would much rather watch a Meta Knight Ditto or a Meta Knight match versus anyone in Brawl over any of the Smash 4 matchups. For the same reason I would watch Melee Fox do anything over whatever Smash 4 has to offer.